All right, welcome back to Overengineered, the podcast where we ask the question, what's the absolute best way to do things we already have a perfectly acceptable solution for? Today, I'm here with my friend Alex Hillman. Alex, I know Alex as the founder of Indie Hall, although I know that you do a lot more than that. And I imagine that maybe for a lot of people, Indie Hall is another thing that you do. So I'll let you do a proper introduction for yourself.
Yeah.
But Alex, we've known each other for a long time. I don't know. Before we get into it, why don't you say hi and do a proper introduction for yourself? Because I don't think I can
Sure.
actually.
I'm always curious how someone's going to intro me because sometimes I don't know where it's going to go. Hey, it's really good to see you, first of all. So, yeah, I wear a few different hats. You already mentioned Indie Hall is a co-working community that I started all the way back in 2006 before co-working was in the
Anyone's
zeitgeist
radar. Yeah.
on anyone's radar. At that point, we weren't even like, we did use the word co-working, but every time we did, everyone's like, what are you talking about? And so this is our 18th year. We're turning 19 in September, which is insane.
That's wild.
And we were the first co-working space in Philadelphia and one of the few independent co-working spaces remaining, not just in Philadelphia, but it appears in the United States.
Wow.
Possibly further, which is, the arc of co-working and the pandemic did quite a number on co-working as I know it, but we're still doing the community-centered stuff that we've always done. The thing that folks that listen to your podcast might know me more for is my work with Amy Hoy on Stacking the Bricks, where almost as long as I've been doing Indie Hall, Amy and I have been helping creative people who have the skills to make things, whether it's code, design, writing, potentially physical stuff. It doesn't need to be digital and software, although most of our crew is sort of digitally making things. We help them learn all the other stuff that they need in order to actually sell the things that they're making, and more specifically, to figure out who they're well suited to make things for, what things those people already want and would potentially buy, and then a whole systematic approach to kind of building trust with people before you even have a thing to offer, so on and so forth, and a whole suite of other things. I also self-published a book under that title during the pandemic called The Tiny MBA. That's been super fun. And then the third hat that I wear most often is the 10,000 Independence Project, which is getting less attention this year, mostly because my partner is dealing with some health issues. But the goal there is to help 10,000 Philadelphians become sustainably self-employed across all categories, verticals, and industries. And we do that through sort of a mix of community, sort of pulling from the Indie Hall playbook, education, pulling from the Stacking the Bricks playbook. And then the third piece that's most new to me is advocacy, which is working with bigger institutions and even local and national governments to help them better understand the realities of one-person businesses in the modern era, because so often they are decades outdated in their understanding of what you can actually do and what's necessary to support a modern small business. So that's the three pieces that I often combine into an intro and covers most of the bases of what I'm working on these days.
It is very funny. I feel like, I don't remember when it happened, but I remember listening to another podcast in the like Laravel web dev sort of programmer startup-y space, and someone mentioning your name and me just being like, what is, that's something weird. Worlds are colliding in a very strange way. Because
really
like
funny.
I said, it's like I mostly think of you as the Indie Hall guy, but like I know that you have a lot more going on. But that made me chuckle, and it's been fun. I don't know. I don't get up to Indie Hall as much anymore now that you're in Northern Liberties, but it's been fun kind of seeing you a little bit more on Blue Sky and reconnecting a bit. And I miss it. I love the space that you've got up there now too. It seems like a great iteration of the idea.
Yeah.
And I don't know, one of these days I'll find my way back up there, but
Totally. Well, you always got a home.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, and that's basically, sort of why I reached out was um, I kind of accidentally fell into this place of like fostering a little bit of a community in the PHP world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that um, it's something that frankly I'm not super well suited to, because I think that it's the type of thing that just needs like sort of constant tending and attention, and I am like I come in, I do deep hard work for a while, and then I dip out for a while kind of person.
Yep.
So, I'm doing my best to try to facilitate this thing, and I'm pretty upfront with everyone about what it is that we're doing. It's like, here's a platform that people can use. I'll do my best to help out where I can. There's no guarantees. But it's been really fun and really rewarding. And on this sort of micro scale, I'm also running one of the PHP meetups in Philly. So I find myself thinking about community a lot lately with regards to that project. And more generally, I think that like, as certainly during the pandemic, I had to um, I had to like reach out to the like broader community on the internet that I was like sort of a part of, and make that a bigger part of my life to sort of stay sane.
Yep.
And that's just been such a rewarding process for myself, that it's also, I think the my relationship to the idea of just like community and being more intentional about like how I participate in the communities that I'm part of is just like a thing that I'm thinking about a lot. And so I kind of I've joked about this in the past. I feel like when I first joined Indie Hall, or maybe not first, but like it when I was just like an Indie Hall regular, like coming in every day, I think, you know, you and Adam would often be talking about community, community, community. And I think that there was a period of time when I was there that I was kind of like, okay, guys, like it's just a place to work. Also, like maybe you're overstating the value. And then I spent time at other co-working places, and I realized, oh no, like actually, the intention that you put into the space, and the work that you have put into like building a community is like really obviously a huge part of Indie Hall's success. So like,
Yeah.
thank you for doing that first off, because that was a huge part of my life for a long time, and I really, yeah, I benefited a lot from that. Honestly, a lot of my closest friends now are people who came from the Indie Hall community, even if none of us
Totally.
really are there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it just made me realize like, no, it really does matter. Like you can't, obviously these things do grow naturally on their own as well, but there's more to it than that.
I mean, I think back to, well, first of all, thank you. You know, uh, I'm grateful to hear it always. That drum that we've beat for as long as we have is visible, and sometimes it's most visible when you're either coming from a place where you don't have it, or all of a sudden you went from having it to not having it. So the way
Yeah,
you kind of
for
describe
sure.
that makes, so especially pandemic. I think the pandemic was such an interesting window because unlike the co-working space and business side of things, things could not have been more challenging and dire. But also in some ways, it felt like the thing we had been preparing for the entire time. Not not
Mm,
not a global health crisis, but the forced isolation, where it's like, oh, this
right.
is actually the thing where we understand how to guide people to each other, because the opposite of community is isolation. The opposite of isolation is community, as far as I'm concerned.
Sure.
But to bring it all the way back, I think you said something about like, you know, you're not suited to this work because it requires tending. And then where you sort of led us to is the idea that you like, I've gone back and forth with the language around community building. I don't think you can actually build community. In the literal sense, it is more like gardening. The raw materials already exist. And it is like gardening is such a good metaphor because ultimately, like, you can provide the best or the worst soil, the best or the worst air, the best or the worst water, but ultimately it's the seeds in the plant that's going to do the growing. And I feel like the community works very similarly, where the things you control are environmental. The community is the sort of like the recovering programmer part of my brain. It looks at it, if there's an algorithm of community, it is some amalgamation of relationships and connections, and transactions are somewhere in there too, but they're like a rounding error in the grand scheme of things.
Mm,
It's more of how do people show up for each other, and how do you set it and create an environment where certain things are more likely in that direction. Things that would erode those kinds of things like trust and connections are less likely. And that environmental
mm.
approach is sometimes space design, but a lot of time it's what's in the conversation, or it's how we frame the reason we're bringing people together. Even the way you arrange a gathering sometimes. Like, we work with a lot more other organizers now than I think ever before, and getting to watch the ones who have a similar set of instincts to us, where they see a room, and where the chairs are set up in rows facing the front for a presentation, and the first thing they do is rearrange the chairs into a circle or a semicircle so people can actually look at each other. And I'm like, that's a subtle thing. There's a reason that person is doing that. And then there's other
Mm,
folks, like we just last night had a group come through, these guys that are building a community of folks that work in the real estate industry. And as tends to be the case in any sort of industry vertical, you've got people that are connecting, sharing knowledge and opportunities, but they tend to be isolated and in silos, even within their own industry, because you've got your brokers, you've got your agents, you've got your builders, you've got your
sure.
lenders, all those kinds of things. And so to create a room where people are coming together to talk about the business side and the relationships and connections that really fuel all of that, for all of my distaste for real estate professionals, I've been really impressed with this crew who, the quality of people that they're bringing to the room, but also like they took some guidance early on where, their first meetup, I said, how do you want to arrange the room? What's the vision? What's the goal? And they said, well, we're thinking we're going to put out some chairs, and, we'll come up here and we'll talk a little bit, and then, do kind of a Q&A. And I was like, I'm sure that would be valuable. You guys are super knowledgeable, and there's folks that can learn from you. Is that the goal, though? Or is the goal for them learning that each other have knowledge and value? In which case, the way you set up the room matters, and the way you guide them into a conversation matters. So they took my guidance and did more of like a think, pair, share exercise, where they had people break into little groups of 4 or 5, 6 people. Everyone had the same prompt. They've got 20 or 30 minutes to go talk through, a challenge in the business or something along those lines. And then the groups come and report back. And they're getting to hear that they're not the only one with that problem. In
Yeah.
fact, many people in the room have the same problem. And now those people feel more connected because they have a common challenge, or they have the opportunity to learn from each other and how each other have solved those problems. And then the organizers also get to learn and say, oh, maybe we can bring in an expert on a thing that half the room wants to learn more about.
Right.
And
Right.
instead of putting that person in front of the room to talk at them, let's put them in the mix of that kind of scenario and have them be there to sort of guide and facilitate and riff on what and how people are talking about amongst themselves. And just that one tweak changed the dynamic to the point where during the event, I'm hearing these guys be like, I've never been to an event like this. This is so cool.
Hmm.
Or in their parlance, this is fucking awesome. But whatever, like, like it's been really, really, I've really enjoyed watching them take that little bit of guidance from me and own it and make it their own. And now
Mm.
means it gives an opportunity for us to be like, all right, let's add another layer to that and really make something that I think has the potential to stand out in the local industry, of which there are, thousands. Who knows? I don't know how many people in the real estate industry in Philadelphia. It's huge. If the,
It's
if
got
the,
to be
the
a
little
lot.
pocket, if the little pocket that's gathering at Indy Hall has that little bit of Indy Hall sprinkle on it, I feel really good about that.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. One of the things that I've spent some time sort of thinking about and trying to just put a little bit of guidance together for other people who are trying to organize these meetups is just thinking about format, like event formats. Because honestly, one of the hardest parts is just finding speakers. Like that's what that's sort of what
Hmm.
the standard for these types of tech meetups are, is like a person comes, gives a presentation, you have some Q&A, and you have some
Networking
schmoozing
time.
before and after. And,
Yeah.
and I just knew for myself that like, I didn't want to do that every meeting. Like I didn't want to organize that every meeting. I knew people who had kind of given up organizing meetups because they found themselves having to prepare a presentation every time because they couldn't find a speaker. I didn't want to do that.
Yep.
And so I kind of have landed right now on this cadence of, we try to do a speaker every third or so meetup. We do like a show and tell where anyone can do like a 5 minute, just like, let's show off
Love that.
something that you're working on. And then we just do one that's just purely social, just, no format, just come, sit down, talk with people. That's it. And that's been pretty good for us. And I think it's a good way to start for a lot of meetups. But I've done the like sort of traditional breakout session where you break out into groups, and then sort of like each group shares with the larger group in like a board setting. Um, and it never even occurred to me that that format could work for just like an informal meetup, but it totally
Yeah.
would. And I can see that actually being a really, yeah, like an interesting format for something like a tech meetup. You know what I mean? Where it's like, here's a
One of
prompt.
the one of the many things I love about it is that it scales kind of, I don't know about infinitely, but
Mm,
for, within the bounds of a meetup in
yeah.
both directions, where like that works really well if there's four people,
Yeah.
right? Same format, just one group really.
Yep.
And it works for 40 people. And I've done it for 400 people. I've done it as here's how sick I am. I'll get invited to keynote at a conference, and I don't like, as much as I love talking, I don't like keynoting. Because if I don't have an opportunity to really dialogue with the people I'm talking with, I'm not on my A game. And so
Mm,
I do this wacky thing where at the beginning of almost every I'd say at the beginning of almost every keynote that I've given that I'm proud of, I gave 10 minutes of that keynote to the audience at the beginning. And I did something like this where I said, 2 to 3 people, you're going to talk. And when you come back, I'm going to ask you some questions. And that is a way for them to maybe for the first time actually get to talk to the people sitting next to them. But it's also a way for me to do just in time research on who I'm talking to. And then on the fly, I'm going to either shape the presentation that I had planned around that, or even if I don't change it, I will have people in the room that I can point to and kind of like pull into the context, and it makes whatever I've prepared look like
yeah.
magic, right?
That's
And
very
I've done
clever.
that with rooms of 500 plus people. So you can do it for 4 people, 40 people, 400 people. The same format works, and then
Hmm.
it's a matter of what other things do you want to do with it. But I don't know. I'm always looking for ways to get the people in the room to turn to each other, because there's so many things in the room that are in the little room and also just in the world around us that are trying to draw our attention anywhere but to the person that's sitting right in front of us.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we did a similar. I was part of a strategic planning process not that long ago that had like a community element, maybe 35 people or so in a room, sort of in the early phases. And we did something which I honestly I wouldn't have expected to have worked as well as it did, but I thought worked beautifully, which was we did the breakout. I think the way she had us do it was we paired in twos and had like a 5 minute conversation, and then the twos paired with twos, and you synthesized both conversations, and then the fours paired with fours, and you just kept on until it was the whole group.
That's great.
And in theory, that seems like it might, or like if you had just told me that that was what we were doing, I think I would have been hesitant. Just like it seems, I don't know, something about it seems like overwrought, or I don't know what. But it was actually I think a really interesting way, because there were also specific. It was like the first group has 8 points, but the second group only has six or whatever, right? So you have to take the 16 points and find like even fewer that are like, these are the ones that we wholly agree on as an entire, right? And so we were synthesizing down to, I don't know exactly what the numbers were, but it was like, you're condensing it down, you're condensing it down, you're trying to find like, okay, you were saying this and we were saying this, and like, how do we kind of like, we all agree that they're sort of in the same space. So how do we like get it to one point? and that exercise was really interesting. I don't know exactly how that piece of it translates to like a tech meetup,
It,
but the process was really
yeah, I mean, here's what's interesting is like maybe not at a standard meetup, but one of the things, and you've been a part of this over the years too, is when we do town hall meetings, which is like another
yeah.
format where it's a more of like the way I always think about town hall is an opportunity to reflect on recent history, snapshot now, and think together about the future. And maybe it's something that you do once or twice a year if you're doing a monthly meetup. I can't imagine it being more than that. But applying something like this, which is like, all right, well, what do we want to do as a group over the next year? Here's and for you to do what you did with me is like, all right, we're basically doing. People may not be even fully aware that there's basically three formats, and so you bring that to the surface. And it's like,
Right.
which is the best? If we were to let go of one, which would we let go of? And if we were to replace it with something, what would we replace it with? And run that kind of
Yeah.
exercise like you described. The thing that I love about that, and I might borrow that myself, is I think one of the most uh, mentally taxing parts of the job of a community leader is listening to tons of people, synthesizing what they said and
Mm.
reflecting it back to them, because it's doing two things at once. It's helping them know that they were heard by you and helping them hear things that maybe they haven't heard yet because they didn't hear that from that other person. So without it without it, the messenger being a necessary part of the message, right?
Hmm.
And that reflection process is, in my experience, critically valuable, but it's a buttload of work and it's just
Yeah.
exhausting and it's
Yeah.
hard. I've gotten good at it because I've done it for almost 20 years.
Right.
But what I love about the process you described is it not only sounds like a way to accomplish some of those goals, right? It literally is doing that because people are getting to see at each step of the, like, they're getting to see what other people are saying rather than it even having to go through my brain first. So very
Right.
high resolution view into what other people are thinking that is both similar and different. But it also by one of the key things that like I think made Indie Hall special early on is how much stuff was done by the hands of members
Mm.
and how much good stuff came from the minds of members. And to, I think I'm always thinking about like what are the things that we can present to members that make them feel a sense of ownership. And that was why
Hmm.
when we did Reboot, which for folks that don't know what Reboot is, we basically closed the space for an entire weekend. We spent weeks planning this up front because we were going to close early on a Friday. And it started as like a very technical solution to the need to do some spring cleaning. But it also became this milestone where whether you were a member for 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, or longer, now this went from being a space that I come to a space that I've had a measurable impact on. I feel a sense of ownership over. And when you can get members to feel that sense of ownership, it goes from being a meetup I go to a meetup I belong to. And that is a really, really special
Yeah. Yeah.
transition.
For sure.
And I feel like what you described as a facilitation process, in addition to the synthesis of information, which is inherently valuable, the participatory buy-in being like it's the whole thing means that whatever comes out of it, whether people agree with it fully or not, they know where it came from. They have a better understanding of where it came from, and they were a part of generating it.
Yeah.
Those are priceless in terms of when I think of what are the things that make a community really thrive. Those are the things I'm always looking for new ways to create. And that is that I think those are the kind of equivalents of the good nutrient rich soil, good access to light, clean water, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting. I mean, the question that brings up for me is like when I think about uh PHP X Philly, I often describe it as like I really lucked out because we have one member of the community who hosts in a big office that he's got in the Bach that's like really convenient for a lot of the folks who are coming and just like really suits this group very well.
Yep.
But and then we have we have 4 or 5 people who show up regularly who all are just like, I feel like if I stopped organizing it, like they could just pick up exactly where I left off. Like that they're like they have ownership and like, folks are offering to bring seltzers or whatever, like
So it's not just that they could; it's you have some degree of confidence that they would.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. And we have a bunch of other folks who come and go, and some folks who will come to a couple meetups here and there, and like, I still think of as part of the core group, but like there are a handful who are like, yeah, I think more of as like co-organizers or like, something along those lines, even though it's not like there's never been a conversation about that, or like it's not formal in any way, but there, there's just like
yep,
some sense of ownership, right? And I think that's been so great because it's just like it makes so many parts of the meetup just so much easier because you just know, like, I'm just gonna go and the like four or five of us are gonna hang out. And whatever else happens, like sometimes a bunch of people show up and we have like this great chance to meet a bunch of new people. And sometimes no one else shows up and it's just the like five people sitting on around a sofa, like hanging out for a couple hours. And like
can't
both of
lose.
those are wonderful, wonderful times. And I'm like, I don't feel like I did anything. Like I just feel like this thing just sort of like naturally happened. And I'm wondering, like, yeah, is there is there some lesson that can be like communicated to other people who are trying to organize these groups? Or is it just
Yep,
like, is the lesson just like, because right now I kind of just say to people in the beginning, don't worry at all about volume, right? Like just have regular meetups, try to find those handful of people who are just going to come and
yep.
hang, and like start to build around that, because that feels like that's what worked for me, so that's the advice I'm going to give. But I'm wondering, like, yeah, is there a way to sort of like be a little bit more intentional about that, or fostering that like sense? Maybe you're right that like really bringing people into the process even more is a piece of that. I don't know, what thoughts do you have there?
I mean, I think I would obviously was not there, but I would be willing to bet that while there's some luck at play as well, there's also a set of instincts that you bring to the table, and even you describing, even you having the sensibility that a few people showing up and having a good time together is not only acceptable, it's good. is
Sure.
is it, I think it's like a lot of this comes back to like expectations framing, and I think a lot of people, and people look at indie hall too, where they see the result, and they want to know how to create it, and then when I tell them what we did at the beginning, they want to jump straight to the result. This is true of
Right.
entrepreneurship and all those kinds of things.
Sure.
So like I think when people want to replicate a thing, often they want to replicate the end result, not the stuff you did at the beginning. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing I've learned over the years is the hard part is I can tell you what we're doing. That probably won't help you much. I can tell you what we did, and that'll help more. I can tell you how we think and how we make decisions and encourage you to make your own decisions based on the feedback loop and participation of your community. I look at it more through a lens of like design patterns, right?
Right.
I mean, again, this is me borrowing from my software background. Is like these are it's beyond best practices and principles and more like, that worked. I wonder if it'll work again. Or what are the environmental effects that I could create so that the odds of it happening again are more in my favor? But again, recognizing what I do and don't control. So
Right.
I think a lot of times people are starting these things because I don't want to say for the wrong reasons, but I'd say for compromised ones where it is about ego, or it's about a client pipeline. It's like if your goal is numbers and scale, the question I always ask is why? Because you've heard me say this a million times, bigger is not better. Better is better. And so if the goal is to be big, that's not inherently a bad thing. But if you can't tell me why, then that's the problem.
Sure. Yeah.
right?
And I
So,
mean,
but those early days, I think really, what you described about the early days is the same early days of Indie Hall, the same early days of many of the groups that I've worked with and supported. So like that sounds familiar. Is it a guaranteed playbook? Of course not. But it's the one, it's the, like the pattern recognition part of my brain kicks in and goes, yeah, it's not surprising to me that that works because that's what I see work the majority of the time.
right. Right. Yeah, I think that some people or some companies will sort of like sponsor and manage meetups as like a hiring pipeline or something like that. I
Hmm.
don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. Like,
Neither do I.
I know the now long defunct Philly PHP that existed 8 years, 9 years ago. I think that was sort of how it started, but it turned into a really wonderful, flourishing meetup in its own right. So I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with approaching it that way, but I do think that there's also nothing wrong with approaching it from I just want to get together with some like-minded people or people who deal with the same problems that I deal with and like understand my day-to-day work experience or like understand how
Totally.
I think and just like that's that.
The thing that comes to mind is that, I agree with you. I don't think there's anything wrong with a company or a group starting it as a recruitment pipeline. In fact, when I work with actually this has become harder, and I'm curious because you're actually more embedded in some ways than I am. Like in the past, my approach for meetup sponsors was thinking of it as the value is recruitment. So I'd go to a company that was
Hmm.
hiring with some alignment and say, hey, what are you already spending on tabling at job fairs or job postings, listings, stuff like that? And like, if you can carve out X amount of dollars, like, and also if you're spending X amount of dollars on that, what do you consider a good result? If you spend $500 to go to a job fair, including everybody's time, and you get one lead, was that a success? For some people, the answer is yes. For some, they're like, absolutely not. And depending on that, then I can look and say, all right, well, you supporting this meetup, not once, but for 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year, comparably, here's the potential, right? And that worked super well, and I think
Yeah.
was mutually beneficial because often people are coming to meetups looking for jobs, they're looking to network, they're looking for the next opportunity. So like, as long
Yep.
as everybody wants the same thing and the goals are aligned, the transaction I don't think is inherently a bad thing. I think where things get screwy is again when people go in stating the goal of one thing and then making choices that clearly take them in a different direction. So
Right.
like I
Right.
always say when people come to me with an idea, I was like, I don't judge ideas, I judge on alignment. And I go, what are we trying to do? And I can't tell you whether or not something is a good idea or a bad idea. I can tell you whether or not I think that will help you do the thing you said you want to do or not.
Right.
And again, just
Right.
my opinion, but I feel way more comfortable approaching things that way. So you know, I, I, I think the big takeaway, whether it's co-working or meetups or otherwise, is like being comfortable and confident with whatever the starting point is,
Mm.
and and to even ask yourself, like, if it didn't grow, would I be okay with that?
Right.
Or what does it need to grow into in order for this to be worth it to me? And that could be a
Right.
company answering that question. They're going to answer it differently from somebody like yourself who is, a leader at a company. People at different stages of their career. There's a bunch of different ways to answer it. Again, I don't
Yeah,
really
for
judge
sure.
the answer so much as I judge the alignment.
Yeah. No, I that's a good it's a good because I'm sort of like filtering all of this through the big readme that I've got. That's like, what how does this turn into some like useful advice for the folks who are interested in starting these meetups. And I think that like just that question of like there's there's no wrong reason to want to do this, but like understand what your reason is and like go from
Do you
there.
have anything? Do you have anything in that README that describes examples of success?
Mm, not really. No.
So one of my favorite things, I think this is true of a lot of things, is people tend to get excited about it, have a thing, get excited about a thing, but have a very limited view of what success looks like. They at most have one comparison, and again, if they're comparing themselves to, it's a co-working space comparing themselves to Indie Hall, and I'm like, you can't compare yourself to Indie Hall today. That's not fair to either of us. And so I think it would be really cool to think through and even talk to the other regional organizers and say, what are some of the things, both the obvious things, but
Yeah.
also the less obvious things? Is it somebody getting a new job opportunity? Is it somebody considering a new technology that they hadn't considered before? Is it somebody giving a talk for their first time, or speaking in front of, maybe not even giving a talk, just talking in front of a room of their peers for the first time? I've talked to so many people who, like,
Yeah.
the most valuable thing about meetups is them getting comfortable talking about a thing they care about in person in front of a room of their peers. And I
Yeah.
think reframing some of those smaller scale, extremely achievable wins helps people see those wins that are under their nose and they're just really easy to overlook because you're thinking about, well, how do I double the size? Or how do I get my next sponsor? Or how do I get my next speaker? Or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like giving people it's almost like a flashlight to shine in the corners of their meetup and be like, no, good stuff is happening here. You just might not be noticing it, or you might not be
Yeah.
realizing how valuable it actually is to be able to say, we did this.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. Well, and I mean, I'm certainly, I mean, I think that my hesitation there, or not hesitation, but the thing that like kind of I react to that is I think in a lot of ways I think that I've been able to put the energy that I have into this like PHPX stuff in part by just saying like this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm interested in. Like
Yep,
I will I will I will say that much, but I'm doing no more. You know what I mean? And so I'm kind
totally.
of like, for me, I'm essentially out here to like make some friends and like have like a nice time from time to time. And I I don't want to make it into anything more than that because I don't want to make it like a new job for myself. You know what I mean?
I mean, this feels like the plight of open source too, right? It's
Hey,
like,
a
I want to
hundred
publish open
percent.
source, but like, no, I'm not accepting pull
Right,
requests.
right. You can
Or
submit your
I
pull.
am, but only
I'm
these
not necessarily
kinds.
looking at them. Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly. So like, I think, I mean, I think it is super valuable to know that boundary and decide this is as much as I want to do. The only thing I would throw out and say, like, are there other people in the ecosystem that, if you were to open up and share this conversation, say, would somebody else? I'm wondering even if what it would look like to have those folks. And I'm thinking about like what's easy mode for this. And right now, easy mode for me for a lot of things, getting them out of my head is like having people ask me questions, and I record myself talking, throw it into a transcription thing, and I might even throw that into Claude and have it like rearrange my thoughts into something cohesive because I was just rambling. And I feel like if you were to do something similar, where it's like, you know, these are these are how I'm thinking. These are not necessarily. This is not advice. This is, here's what worked for me. In the same way, this is not an open source project that I intend to maintain forever. This is an open source. I made this. It's useful. If it's useful for you too, you can have it. I think
yeah,
there's room for both ends of that spectrum, and a lot of
yeah,
stuff in between.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, at this point, we have 40, 50 organizers of different
I didn't
groups
realize it had gotten
who
that big.
it's I mean,
Whoa. I feel like I saw when you had like the first two or three other cities that you added. That's amazing.
yeah, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. This is really good radio. 15 meetups in North America. We've got 4 in Asia. We've got 5 in Europe. We've got 3 in Australia, 1 in Africa. Yeah, we've got meetups all over the place.
That's so cool. I
And
did not
those are
realize that.
just
That's very
the
exciting.
it is. It's I mean it's very cool, and like it's it's been mostly pretty low key for me to manage it because it's like people just PR their group to the like open source repository. When I merge it, like there's a script that kind of like sets it all up. So like essentially
Yep.
the like technology side of it's not that hard to do. Add them to the Discord, and then there's mostly self-managed from there. So it's like scales pretty well. But yeah, like we've got almost 50 people in this organizers group that I could easily pop a couple of questions in there and just say like, hey, who is interested in maybe taking the lead on some of these things that I'm not ever going to take the lead on, you know?
Again, a line you will hear me say, you may have even heard me say before, is like, I don't have a lot of tricks. I have a couple of tricks. I've just gotten very good at them. And one of and so going back to town hall, like what you just described feels like an opportunity to do like a virtual town hall with
Mm-hmm.
organizers,
Yes.
and something that makes it, helps them connect with each other, helps you gather some information, helps them reflect back, and also for you to prompt and say, here's some potential things we could do. We don't have to do any of this, but if you're interested in that, know that I am interested in supporting it in these specific ways. And here's some things that
Right.
I'm not willing to do. But if there's other people, that doesn't mean it can't be done if there's other people in the community who do. So like that feels like a really cool opportunity. And honestly reminds me a lot of the early co-working days. Like co-working proliferated the way that it did because we applied open source sharing principles using a Google group and a wiki because GitHub didn't exist yet. But it was, that was what happened is the first handful of folks in the San Francisco Bay Area and New York started just trading notes. And I discovered one of those folks. I was collaborating with them as a freelancer, and I was just amazed by what was going on. And then that group of other people starting and leading and growing in their own ways, some more like Indie Hall, some less like Indie Hall. Like that Google group, eventually I migrated into a it's Discourse is the open source forum thing, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
That doesn't confuse
and
me at all, ever.
I really don't like Discourse. That's a whole other story. But that the value of an emergent community of people in cities around the world who, and because here's what really here's the thing that like really galvanizes for me is when people would want to learn from Indie Hall, I realized Indie Hall can't exist in other cities. Things like Indie Hall can, but Indie Hall is inherently Philadelphia,
Interesting.
right? I think Indie Hall works the way it does because of Philadelphia. And there's places that are more like us and less like us, but I think the places that are most like us, it's not because they followed our playbook best, except for the part that said, really understand your local culture, really be embedded and invested in the local community. And so
Interesting.
because of that, I feel like the realization of people sharing our ideas and trying our ideas in their cities and saying, here's what worked and here's what didn't. Again, going back to open source, like there's not basically we got instant forking of the ideas, but also with a little bit of a conversational paper trail of, I took Alex's idea and we added this other layer, or we scrapped most of it. We took this one thing that we really loved. And sort of the remixing of that across all of these communities, I think, is an opportunity to enrich all of them. And that's not going to come from them, from those folks. And then you can bring whatever you want back to Philadelphia, where the Philadelphia crew that you're working with can hear that. And that way they can hear a thing they love. And instead of waiting for you to do it, they can be like, I want to do that. I want to own that I want to do a thing like they're doing in Detroit, or whatever it is. And like having the Discord, you said you got a Discord that's connecting all of them. I feel like that's very more like the Google group. But then we started getting together in person. Initially, we piggybacked on South by Southwest. Somebody was going to South by Southwest in like the first year, and this was Indie Hall did not have a physical space yet. It was it was like spring 2007. I just learned about South by. I went and I bumped into a bunch of the people that I had only met on the Google group in Austin because there was a high overlap between like internet web interactive people and early co-working people. And so all of a sudden I'm in this bar in South Congress in Austin, Texas, surrounded by a Google group, but in real life. And I'm like, this is the coolest experience I've ever had. And it changes the relationship with those people when we're all only interacting over text. And so,
Yeah.
at some
Oh,
point it
for
would be
sure.
cool for y'all to get together at a Laravel conference or a PHP conference or something like that. But in the short term, just to do some virtual events that are bringing those folks together, I think would unlock a really cool layer of how do you add these things that you, it sounds like you have the instinct that there's more to be done, but you don't necessarily want it to come from you. And the opportunity to kind of look for me, community building is not about making things happen. It's about looking for things that would happen if they were given a chance. And so a lot of times it's about giving permission that might not even be mine to grant, but somebody thinks they need, or simply saying, "Yeah, that sounds cool. You should do that. What do you need from me?" And then having boundaries for myself, like, I can't do that, but here's how I can help you. And just
Yeah.
being like continuing to play that role. It sounds like you already have, and then cycle that. And every iteration, just like every iteration of the meetup has an opportunity to evolve, every iteration of the things that we're talking about has an opportunity to evolve, catch up with the times, new patterns, new players, things that used to work no longer make sense,
Yeah.
so on.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. I mean, we've been talking little bit in the Discord about doing like a group Zoom of some sort. And I like the idea of doing this breakout session with that group. Cause I feel like that could be a really good exercise to like, it's a bunch of people who haven't interacted with each other that much other than a little bit through the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And we will be, I don't know how many people, but I know a handful of organizers are going to be at Laracon this year. And surprisingly, a bunch of the PHP Philly people are going to be there. It's going to be really fun. So
To
hopefully we'll get a
do
chance
a
to
happy
do,
hour or something
yeah,
low key.
yeah,
Again, a thing that doesn't require a lot of upfront planning and upfront costs. It's like we're going to be here.
yep.
Like
We'll be at
maybe
this
somebody wants
spot.
to buy the first round of drinks, but beyond that, no obligations. And
Yeah,
actually,
yeah,
even
for
like
sure.
I think back to those early days of South by Southwest and like experiences that kind of rewired my brain. My first year at South by Southwest, being surrounded by a lot of my internet friends or soon to be internet friends, and in some cases, like people I really looked up to in terms of like people who were writing the books and pioneering the technologies that I wanted to build. Like that was one of the most exciting parts. And I remember hanging out at a bar that had this like big backyard area and a bunch of tables, and somebody who had a big enough following that people knew was there said, "I'm going to be hanging out here, and we're basically going to be doing a." I don't remember how he framed it, but it was basically like everyone pitches in and buys a pitcher. It's like two pitchers of beer. And
Okay.
so we ended up with just like table, like just like more beer that like basically everyone bought beer for everybody else. No singular sponsor, just one organizer. And so everyone
Uh-huh.
buying everybody else's beers creates that. It's almost like a potluck, kind of,
Uh-huh.
and was like so
That's interesting.
silly and kind of a spectacle. But I've
Yeah.
never seen it done since. And now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, I want to do that again. That was so fun. Um, but yeah, and then like it gives everyone like, all right, I don't like those kind of beers, so I'm going to go buy something else that I do like and share that with like again same benefits of a potluck. So I think those kind of experiences also made me think about when we do start bringing sponsors on board, how to do that in a way where it's hard, not impossible, hard for things to be kind of corrupted by the sponsorship. Like the bigger something gets, rather than throwing a bigger sponsor at it, I'd rather throw a handful of smaller sponsors at it, both to
Yeah,
reduce the
sure.
liability of that one sponsor going away, but also making it so that like a title sponsor has limited influence. And like Barcamp, remember the early days of Barcamp, kind of parallel to co-working Indie Hall too. Same, and that was like a principle of Barcamp is no title sponsors.
Okay.
Basically, the highest level of sponsor was designed to have several people in it, so no one could
Mhm.
own the event. And I thought that was such an
Mhm.
interesting. Again, you design the environment for the outcomes you want, and if I want something that feels like the community put it together, don't let somebody gather up too much power or
Right.
a sense of control in the case of a sponsor.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I want to talk about sponsorship a little bit at some point. I feel like I want to pick your brain around technology a little bit too,
Sure.
because you mentioned discourse and Discord, and I was joking with you that I feel like you've been chasing the email group chat whatever thing
My
for
white
as
whale.
long as I've known you. Yeah,
It's my white whale. It'll kill me. Going down with the boat.
but it is like what? you know, there is no great tool for
No,
all of this right now, right? But like,
no.
what do you like right now in terms of like, I I I think having the Discord is great, but it does I hate these like, gated chats where all of this information is getting lost essentially as soon as
Yeah,
it scrolls past the top of the window. I don't we use Discourse Internetgy for our forum and it's fine, but it's not anything that I am excited to use elsewhere.
right.
Yeah, like, do you have anything that you like right now that, like,
Nope.
you know no.
Well,
Yeah.
so all right. So I mean, here's I, the Google group. I'd say email discussion lists in general, and this might just be me showing my age. I still think is the best tool category, right?
Okay.
The history of Indie Hall has we've always had until the last couple of years a hybrid of a chat room tool of some kind. In the early days, it was Basecamp's Campfire. Remember those days? And a Google group. And then we evolved from the Google group to actually using Basecamp itself, which, like the original Basecamp, I'm amazed at how long it worked. And it worked for a couple of specific reasons I get into. And then, but with it, we were always moving from one tool to the next, but there was always some combination of a chat and a discussion list. And the thing that I've noticed over all of the years, not just with Indie Hall, but every other version of that I've encountered, is a chat tool is great for a sense of real time,
Yep.
uh, but has the lowest percentage of community participation
Mm.
because it requires so much attention, really from
Yeah.
everybody.
Yep.
I think of it as like it's the high gear version. It's like when you want to tap in, you want a quick response. If there are people, you basically you can reach the people that are around right now, which is a fraction of the total community, but it's who's around, right? It's your party line. That on its own has a has strengths and weaknesses, and I find the weaknesses mostly to be that who it reaches being such a small set of the whole.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
The complement being a way to reach the most people, even if it's slower and not in real time, an email discussion list is by far the best. And the reason I say it's the best is because even though people have such a wide range of mostly negative relationships with their inboxes, most people also have an obligation to their inboxes.
Interesting.
So there's obviously outliers there, and I have run one of these email discussion list tools. I'll get to that in a second. For a few years, and that taught me the wide range of relationships that people have with their inboxes, inbox hygiene, and all those kinds of things. And like it's more chaotic and varied than any one person can imagine. But even through all of that, I have not found something better. The closest to better was before Facebook became as terrible as it has, and never mind the fact that so many people have actively left it. The reason Facebook groups work as well as they do when they do is because the people that are in there are already addicted to Facebook. The reason Slack worked as well as it did for as long as it did, and Discord as well, is if you were starting something new and a good chunk of your community is already using that tool, you don't have to do anything new to get them to come there.
Yep.
And with the current fragmentation of the internet, that has gotten harder and harder and harder and harder. And in terms of uh, uh, in terms of systems that are unified and distributed, right? Email is unique, right? Even and am I potentially optimistic of something Fediverse or at Proto coming along? Boy, would that be awesome! But compared to the existing penetration of email, like you can't really operate in this world without email unless you are actively seeking to isolate yourself. I think is just the reality of things. And so using that advantage, I think is super important. And even like when you're using a chat tool or something like that, many of them use notifications to tell you that something is happening in there, because most people aren't keeping the app open all day unless they have a professional reason to. Um, Tends to be the case. So when I'm thinking about, when people say, what tool should I use? I say, is there a tool that some statistical significant, like that some majority, even if it's not more than 50%, some majority of your community already uses? Is it WhatsApp? Then use WhatsApp. Is it Facebook groups? Then use Facebook groups. Like, there are tools that I can't imagine using because they seem like a notification or a moderation nightmare to me. But if that's what your culture is, again, this comes back to like Indie Hall really only making sense in the culture of Philadelphia. I think the online tools have a degree of that as well.
Sure.
And email becomes kind of the least common denominator across all of them. So whatever tool you are building, you still need a system to reach people, to let them know there's something there for them. And eventually it's all going to round back to email. Like, one of the things I've thought of is, and some tools have come along like this, but I haven't found anything that quite matches what I would expect. I'm amazed that there is not a tool that links to your Discord, or your Slack for that matter, and does an LLM based summary of recent conversations, and then lets people opt in or out to daily, every 3 days, or once a week summaries of, here's conversations that you missed. How
Yeah.
does that not? I mean, those should be native to the platforms, given how everybody's being force fed AI. But how somebody hasn't, how there's not a plethora of those tools, given it's like one of the things LLMs are actually extremely good at, is wacky. And I've actually, like, I spent some time playing with a prototype of building something like that in Quad, and pretty happy with what I came up with. And the biggest reason I decided not to ship it for Indie Hall is I'm not sure I want to be pumping Indie Hall's conversations into a commercial LLM. If I was to do it, I might want to do it on a local LLM, just for, privacy reasons more than anything else. But like, I don't know, this is a long-winded way of answering. No one tool has done the job, even when we've been at our best. The best
Yeah.
tools have been hybrids and combinations of tools, where like when a new message gets posted to the discussion list, it also gets that there's a new post gets posted into the chat, and vice
Hmm.
versa. Or like,
Hmm.
one of the things we built during the quarantine was, we I say like 6 or 8 months into the quarantine, we made the switch from Slack to Discord. Slack was becoming like actively hostile to community use,
Yeah.
and I was like, we got to get out of here, and we made the switch to Discord. And at the same time, we were obviously heavily using Zoom for things, and Zoom's like audio video is just still easier and more reliable than Discord's, even though Discord's good and has gotten better. And so I built a little app that catches webhooks from Zoom whenever. So basically, we set up a Zoom room that's always on, doesn't require a login or a password or anything like that, and so every Indie Hall member knows how to get there. And when the first person logs into the room, Zoom sends a webhook that says Chris has entered the room. Our little app catches that, and it generates a panel inside of Discord that says, Chris is hanging out in the Zoom room. You want to join him for a conversation? And the second person comes in, and then Alex's name shows up, and the third. And it was sort of our way of recreating that experience of being at the clubhouse and seeing somebody familiar hanging out in the kitchen and being like, oh, I wanted to ask them something, getting up and walking across, right?
Yep.
So how do you recreate? So I think the problem, I'll end on this thought. The problem with most tools is they are trying to create something without any real understanding of what its offline equivalent was actually doing. And so for me, I'm always like, why do people bump into? Why does people bumping into the kitchen by the water cooler? Why is that even a trope?
Right.
And the reason is because serendipity and the release of serotonin are highly correlated. And when people see a familiar face, they're psychologically drawn to it, or a name for that matter, right? And so it's like, well, it's not that nobody wants to get on Zoom as a rule, but I do want to talk to Chris. And so
Yeah.
how do I make it so that the Zoom room, which was like having the door to the kitchen closed because you can't see who's in the room until you go inside. And think about the experience of walking into the kitchen to see if anybody's there. No one's there. You turn around and leave. How many times a day is that happening in a Zoom room? But when we saw it was actually kind of like inspired by people organically using Discord's voice and video channels. Where one day I just logged into Discord and I saw people hanging out, and I was like, "We didn't plan anything. What's going on over here?" And I realized, oh, if they can see each other, they don't need to have a whole conversation to coordinate a meeting, right?
Right.
And the fact that every single online interaction we have is feels like a meeting, I feel like isn't very conducive to the kind of organic serendipity that makes a
Yeah.
community feel vibrant. And so the question became, how do I create the experience of serendipity that comes from spotting somebody from across the room, be like, I'm going to go over and talk to them. Or I see two people talking, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what they're talking about, right?
Right.
How do you bring those things to the surface? And that's, I think, the job of technology is not to connect us, it's to bring things to the surface so that we can do the connecting ourselves.
Hmm. That's an interesting way to think about it. I I think the one other piece that I am looking for, and this is more like on the organizing the organizers side of thing, not the like
Mm-hmm.
meetup itself, but
Yep.
it is really around like there's so there are so many times when information is shared that is then like useful information is shared and lost in all of these
Yeah.
existing channels, right? And Discord, email, all of it has that same problem.
Yep.
The more private a tool is, not necessarily from like a privacy perspective, but from like a walled garden kind of perspective,
Totally.
um, the worse that is. And yeah, it's really challenging because it's like there's a lot of stuff in the chat that's not anything that needs to be memorialized anywhere, right? But
Yep.
then there's the question that comes up. I mean, I was just thinking about this. This is the same problem. I maintain open source package with a friend of mine called Verbs, um, and we have a Discord. People come in and ask questions, and most of the Discord is just chit chat or people just giving opinions that are like kind of an opinion on a specific problem that doesn't really mean anything to anyone other than the two people who are having that conversation, you know? But every once in
Yep.
a while, someone will say something and I'll come in and give sort of like, this is what I think is the canonical answer to this question right now, you know? Maybe
Yep.
not forever, but right now, this is my thought as one of the organizers or one of the maintainers of this project. And I
Yep.
always think like, I really should like copy and paste this somewhere to make, but I never do. And I always wish that there was like some way of saying like, you know, hey, this piece right here is something to save somewhere for other people to come
Yep.
to, you know?
So yes, what resonates absolutely. I don't think there's an easy answer,
Yeah.
but like the couple of things that have worked for me. I have a rule of thumb that if I give a piece of advice three times, I'm not allowed to give it again without writing it down.
I like that. Sure.
And the goal of writing it down is I'm going to write it for that person, right, or that context, and then I'm going to copy paste it, put it in a place where I can then go clean it up later. And like most of the publishing that I've done in my career originated that way. It's I've given this advice multiple times. Let me just make this my answer, and that's how my personal blog became a go-to resource for people starting co-working spaces around the world. So like there's a again repeating history here. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. And if anything, I think the tools are better now where like you could use an emoji or something like that to
Yep.
trigger an API
Like a
request, grab
bot.
that text,
Yeah.
chuck it into the GitHub repo into like a drafts section. And then, again, the most time that I spent in the past was taking my rough draft and then cleaning it up so that there was a real beginning, middle, and end, or the missing context that, would be necessary for somebody coming along. And I feel like the amount of time I used to put into that compared to taking a casually written answer, which by the way, it's so much easier to write in Discord or even over email than it is to sit down and write in a Google Doc, right?
100%.
And so
Yeah.
use that to your advantage and say, if I'm going to write for a person, in my head, I'm going to write the best answer I can right now so that I can shape
Hmm.
that answer so that next time I link to it. And in fact, the cool part about that is the next time somebody asks that question, I can link to it. And they're like, how did you know I was going to have that question? And I was like, because I'm a wizard. No, just kidding. Because you're not special. Just kidding. Because these because these are really common patterns, and you are special, but not because of this. And I feel like it would be pretty trivial to wire up a workflow where I write my answer in Discord or email, and then I use a star in Gmail or an emoji in Discord, and there's a little bot that grabs it and
Yeah.
takes that text and puts it in the draft, and then maybe the LLM comes in, and I've created a rule set for like ask me the questions that you need in order to fill this out to this level, have the conversation with Claude or ChatGPT, and then have it just clean up the final composition and make that README publishable.
Yeah.
That feels like with a little bit of iteration could turn into a 90+% self like
Yeah.
self-running system, and you're just kind of there to make sure the final thing is what you intended.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, like a thing that I have been experimenting with is just like I've changed my tune on LMs a lot over the last few months. I still have hesitancy around some things. One
Same.
thing that felt, I think that's how a lot of people feel right now. One thing that I had been sort of coming around to as like an interesting in between is like the power of like vectorizing text using these language models and then just putting it in a vector database, and like now the LLM is no longer a part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially just building your own custom search tool, right? Is very interesting to me because I like the idea of not ever responding with like LLM generated content, just using the like natural language processing of these tools to surface original content.
Yes.
And so I could see essentially just like having a thing where, yeah, exactly that. You know, do some sort of reaction on a piece of content in Discord that pumps it into some pipeline that like just literally just throws it into a vector database that then someone on a website could type in a question, and it could just be like, here are conversations that have been like marked as like a help, knowledge base
Yep.
conversations that like match that question.
So, I mean, I think there's room for. I think these things are complementary, right? And that sounds very cool. And a thing that I would love to do for stacking the bricks, for instance, we have like
Mm-hmm.
so much educational material that I keep thinking about ways like how do we make this information more accessible?
Yep.
The other thing that I've learned though is that even when things are searchable, a lot of people don't search. They go to a person that they trust, and
Yeah, for
they
sure.
want to feel like you gave them something special. And so this is not an either or. I'd say it's a yes
Yeah.
and maybe it becomes an internal tool that like it's available, and it's also exactly what you use to do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Because I think there's something to be said, even if I'm delivering the exact same information that is pre-written and is real, like not by an LM, but pre-written by me, the experience of me choosing it for you versus search engine
Yeah, that's
choosing it
fair.
for you. Like
Yeah.
if you consider me the expert or the authority, then the value of the information changes, even if it's identical, based on who it's coming from.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
So it's like, no, this is not just what came up as the first result. This is what Alex handpicked for me, or Chris handpicked for me. So again, I think whether we're talking about LLMs or otherwise, I think the best technology, the best results come from the technology assisting a human doing a thing that only a human can do.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where those two things fit together. Um, but I'm with you. And just to be like totally clear, I don't think having the LLM actually write the article makes any sense.
Sure.
I think having it help me figure, because like I feel like a lot of time figuring out was me looking at what I already wrote and go, all right, what would somebody else need that maybe is not
Right.
in
That
the
I'm not
exact same
seeing.
position as this person?
Yeah.
And I find getting the LM to generate stuff, not great. Like reliably not great. Getting it to get stuff out of my head and then basically do what we do for our communities, but in reverse. Like hear all the stuff that I said and then repeat it back to me in a way that makes sense. Like I'm not going to
Yep.
use its words, but it's helping me organize my thoughts better. And then I sit
Oh,
down
for
and I do the
sure.
writing myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's like, that's the thing, not to go on to another AI tangent, but like,
It's
that is the
2025. What else are
thing.
we going to
Right.
do?
I feel like using these like tools as a way to like get unstuck is like maybe the most powerful thing that I've seen. I'm pretty much just saying that in terms of programming, but I can see how like like writing would be the same way. It's like a lot of times it's not that I can't do something. It's that I haven't done it yet, but like,
Yep.
and it's so much easier for me to have an opinion about like a bad attempt at it than like do the like what I think of as the good attempt at first, you know?
Yep. 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 Yep.
And so I can see how that would, it would be exactly the same here. It's like, yeah, just
If I'm gonna write a crappy first draft and then revise it, why not have the write the crappy first draft? Because I'm gonna throw the whole thing away, and it's
yep.
easier to like. It's the clarity of I know better what I want to write once I've
Yeah,
seen
I
the
know
thing that
why
I
this is
think
bad.
sucks.
Yep.
Exactly. I feel like that's
Yep.
like there's a bit of motivation there. And then the other thing that I think is kind of neat is like I find the value in writing across my career and my life has been that it is the hardest but most valuable form of thinking. And so I'm
Mm.
very,
Oh yeah.
very reticent to give that up because it's given me so much.
Yeah.
At the same time, the hard part of writing often isn't the writing, it's the thinking about what you're going to write and then breaking out of the cycle of saying the words over and over and over your head. Like you got to get them on the page at some point. And so, not uncommon for me to say, I know I want to write this thing, and I'll put on voice mode and ramble for a bit and say, just organize those thoughts and tell me what I just said, and then I'll take that as my outline
Hmm.
towards a particular goal. I might even tell it like, here's what ultimately the goal of what I'm writing is. I'm going to ramble a bit. Can you organize those thoughts into an essay or an email or whatever it is? But I'm not looking for you to write it. Just help me reorganize what's already in my own head, and then I've got a clear
Yeah.
path to start, and then I can bust out a single draft from an outline pretty reliably. But figuring out what goes into it is the hard part.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a very fancy rubber ducking.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. I said that we would get back to sponsorship. As I think about it right now, I'm like, sponsorship is something that I think there's some interesting things to approach in terms of like, potentially as a network of meetups, we could look at sponsorship in a way that's different than individual small meetups can.
Mm-hmm.
And just, I want to try to organize. We already do. There are a number of like, technology companies that want to reach developers who have existing sponsorship programs for meetups that we can like link out to, or a couple of the players in like this specific part of the industry that have like reached out to offer
Yep.
something to the like PHPX world. So there's something there, but I don't know that unless there's like something that you are like, oh, I have this thought about sponsorship. I don't actually know what I'd be interested in talking about it right now. So
So I feel like, I mean, part of this is a thing I'm experiencing right now, which is that the current state of tech and tech hiring is so weird compared
yes,
to the last 18
for
years
sure.
that I've been doing this, that like most of my playbook just straight up does. I mean, straight up doesn't work. Like
Yeah,
people that would respond just have vanished. And it's a combination of budgets vanishing. It's a combination of people being risk averse. It's a combination of people just being exhausted and not really, and not wanting to make a mistake, right?
sure.
So I think things are just weird. I think at a baseline of value for organizers to learn that they're not the only one that's struggling with it in the current
Yeah.
environment is very
Yeah.
helpful. And then back to them trading, if there is anything that's working, what is it? And have it
Yeah.
like, what kinds of companies are you approaching? What does the pitch look like? What do the packages look like? Also, is there anything you did and wouldn't do again? Those kinds of things are useful.
Yeah.
As far as like the bundling, I've thought a bunch about that for Indie Hall as we've gotten more into working with other communities. And it's not a thing that we've executed on completely enough to me for me to feel like I've got good advice to share. But the thing that I the way part of the way that I've approached it is also me pulling from past playbooks in that when fundamental difference between the experience somebody has when they choose to become a member of Indie Hall and come here in general or on a particular day, and people who have an employer that chose it for them and it's their only option and they're told when they have to come in. And it's not that they're having a bad experience, it's that they are fundamentally different.
Sure.
I think they're having a worse experience compared to what I believe is possible. But if they're having a good experience, that's all I really care about. I just know that they're
Sure.
different. And if I were to apply that to the sponsorship model, I would be looking at something that keeps the agency in the hands of the individual organizers
Yeah.
versus a like if you want to stay on PHPX or something like I can't imagine you doing something like that. But like that's the biggest boundary for me for blanket stuff is one sponsor being the right sponsor for all meetups in a network feels unlikely.
Yeah.
It's like part of the way we're approaching it here is I'm working on some stuff to approach the cash for overhead for venue. Being I would love to not have to charge full rate for meetups because it's definitely it prices out a ton of places for us. But for the events that we're already doing, and those folks, they're hosting ticketed events. That's how they're covering the cost of doing an event here. There's still food and drink and other things like that. And so finding food and drink partners where I can say, I have a library of local businesses or regional businesses who, if you have an event up to X amount of people, they can give you, for instance, Yards is down the street, and the deal is, we can get basically half price Yards. And I'm working on something with them where, like, if you've got us up to a certain size, in exchange for, public mentions on their RSVP page and on the event, also like some photos of people enjoying the product, things like that. I think there's a lot of room for creativity there, but it is also so unique to each environment, each meetup. And I
Yeah.
don't know if it translates as well to a tech meetup than it does in some of the like other more like social oriented mixers and stuff like that. So I feel like the only rule that applies across the board for sponsorships in my mind is that alignment is king. You got to want
Mhm.
to have the same things. Basically, I don't do sponsored decks. I talk to potential sponsors and partners and say, what are your goals? What does success look like? And if I believe I can get you that or better, I'm going to tell you that and what we want in exchange for it.
Yeah.
And that it's a bit more work and kind of undermines what seems to be the potential of having a network scale here. But again, it comes back to like I feel like with this kind of stuff, smaller is better than bigger,
Yeah.
or the relationship between the small and big really needs to be carefully considered. Maybe is a better way to look at it.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like I sat down with someone from Guild.host. I don't know if you ever looked at them, but it's like an event. It's like it's a tech event platform, kind of like Luma, I guess.
Got it.
And they've taken the like we have platform sponsors, and that's how we pay for the platform, and then like for the individual groups, like the whole platform is free. And I think for them, that makes a lot of sense. Like, because there is like they have a platform to kind of like sell the sponsorships on.
And
Whereas
and
like,
there and with that, is it like they automatically place a sponsor ad on your RSVP page and
yeah,
stuff like
like
that?
on every page, there's just like a section that shows like these are the platform sponsors for Guild,
So, I mean, that reminds me of like, I mean, remember what the heck was it called? Daring Fireball is the ad
Mm,
network that they either used to be basically before they were doing their own ads. What was it?
yep.
Where it was basically
I
like
can't-
very curated, design
Yeah.
oriented ads. It was like a single graphic or a single. It was like basically like
I remember what that, yeah, I can't think of what it was called.
the Koodle Partners. I want to say is who started it. I don't remember what it was called, but
Hmm.
whatever it was, like I feel like that was it was a reaction to people don't hate ads, they hate intrusive ads and ugly
Yeah.
ads. And so
Yeah.
if we have aligned ads and nice looking ads, they won't hate them. And I think they were right. One of my favorite newsletters is
The
Dense
deck.
Discovery. The Deck, that's it. So yes, I feel like the deck what you're describing is like the deck, but for events instead of blogs. I think it's really cool.
That's an interesting idea. Yeah.
And the I think it's it's surprising to me that we haven't, like the pendulum swings, right? So these ideas come and go. But I'm thinking
Yeah.
about the closest example to this that I've seen executed really well, also happens to be in the design space, is a weekly newsletter called Dense Discovery, that I love. And it's a pretty, I don't want to say run of the mill because it's not. It's actually very well executed, but it's a roundup, stuff for people who like design and creativity and whatnot. And the guy who runs it, Kai, writes a really thoughtful intro essay, and then there's like different segments throughout the newsletter. And he's got one single very classy ad between his intro and the roundup stuff, and then a
Hmm.
small selection of classifieds down at the bottom.
Okay.
And the ads that I ran on Dense Discovery's newsletter for the Tiny MBA, my book, are the only ads in my entire career that I've ever earned back what I spent on them.
Ah, wow.
And I can attribute it to like a bit of luck finding near perfect alignment,
Yeah.
and not just in terms of like the interests, but also the way the ad was presented. This is somebody who was as thoughtful about what they were going to put in the newsletter as I would be.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's lessons to be learned from things like the deck and Dense Discovery's ad model and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the idea of, I mean, it just essentially being like, okay, every week or whatever, we have a slide that is like the like ad network slide. And
Yep,
like, if you want to like if you put it in your, at the beginning of the meetup or whatever, like that gets you access to some amount of the ad money that comes in, to sponsor the event. And it's like that feels something that like
it's opt in.
it's
Its
opt in.
expectations are crystal clear. They can opt in and out at any time. I think
Yep.
I feel like there's something there. I feel like there's something there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think there are a lot of interesting things that could happen because we haven't really seen much around the like recruitment or jobs side of things. But like I imagine that you could potentially go to, I mean, especially like Lairjobs, which is like Laravel job board, right? You could potentially go to them and say like give me an API feed of like that's going to have like the three highest ranked job postings for a given region
Yep,
at any given time. And like you pay us some amount and like those three jobs are going to show up at like the on the slide decks of all the speakers at all these events, like,
yep.
and that's such a like it's such a perfect fit, right? When you go back to the alignment piece, I can't imagine anyone's going to get upset about doing like I'm so ad intolerant that even talking about it like makes me a little bit
I'm the same
uncomfortable.
way, but and this really comes down to presentation. I think people it's not that people hate ads, is they hate being interrupted and they hate being taken advantage of. And I love Amy talked about this line all the time. She said people hate to be sold to, but they love to buy. And
Sure.
I feel like that sums up so much of this. Is like
Yeah.
if you do it right, you've got nothing but a list of success stories of people from your meetups finding jobs through this mechanism, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with you that like the hiring pipeline is one place. Developer tools is another one, although it seems to be like it feels like we're on the in a weird transition between, I feel like all the like developer relations energy and funding is kind of contracted. And
Yeah.
I mean the downside to all of this is that ad sales, the sales side of it's a pain in the ass. And so
Yes.
finding ways to streamline it where it's like, all right, we're going to do an integration like you described, and it's like it's basically on autopilot, or you're going to do like every three, they have to buy 3 or 6 months at a time, and you
Yeah.
rotate them or it's something along those lines.
Yeah.
Because like unless you have someone who really loves selling ads, I get the sense that that's not going to be you.
It is not going to be
But
me.
again, maybe there's somebody in the ecosystem who actually like loves it and is really good. Like the thing is like
Yeah, for sure.
a thing I remind myself all the time: just because I'm allergic to it doesn't mean it's not somebody else's source of joy. I might think that that particular thing is bananas that the person likes that, but that's I'm not going to yuck their yum if it's to our mutual benefit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I don't know what'll come of it, but there's definitely something there. Or there's something to be said for, we are at this place where there is like this network of people who we can pull resources somehow in this direction.
Yeah,
And in some ways, it's maybe just curating a list of companies that are interested in
are open
sponsoring,
to
or
it.
like, yeah, there's like, Warp, the terminal
Yep,
tool. They just have a fixed deal. It's like you play this short video at the beginning of your meetup and we'll give you money. Like
great.
I don't think I'm never going to play a video from a sponsor at a meetup, but if someone wants to do it, okay, that option's there. So there's like just curating that list is one thing, but it feels like there is an opportunity to do something else. I just don't know. Yeah, I like the direction of like kind of trying to think about it as, yeah, what is the deck for just PHP meetups? Like it's such a focused target, right?
Yep,
Like, and there's definitely the hiring side and the developer tooling side that like are obvious fits. No one's going to be upset to see PHP Storm on the first
I
slide
am.
of the talk.
And this probably gets a little dicier, but I feel like agencies of a certain scale
Yeah,
potentially.
for sure.
Um,
Oh,
so again,
absolutely.
I'd say like the biggest downside to ads is whatever you figure out works. You have to expect that it won't work forever because ads are so at the whim of the broader economy, let alone the
Yeah.
industry that you're in.
Yeah.
So I think that's like the biggest liability is once you become dependent on it, you also have to recognize like you're just not in control.
Yeah.
Or like another thing that comes to mind is I don't know if I would say this is good advice, but I know somebody
I love it
who
already.
basically set up. So they used Open Collective, which is
Hmm.
this open source platform for aggregating nonprofit donations through a fiscal host. And they had an event series where people would regularly want to come and either post job opportunities and stuff like that. Or actually, you know what it was? People would come into their Slack or Discord and want to post stuff, and their moderation policy was they would then DM that person and say, "Hey, we don't allow that unless you sign up for a recurring sponsorship of our open collective. The majority of that money goes to supporting our events, giving them hosting, food, and drinks." And like the hit rate there was nearly 100% because that person has already found you and is motivated to post their thing, and they're gonna
Interesting.
sign up for at $100 a month and put it on the corporate card, and then the vast majority of the time forget about it. That's the part
Right.
that I
Never
don't
think about
recommend.
it again. Yeah.
But in the best case scenario, they got what they wanted, and they happily keep coming back for more. I don't like signing up for a thing and then just letting it run while they forget about it. That's the piece I'm not into. But it was enough to grow their sponsorship pool to the point where money was not the reason they weren't doing stuff,
Hmm.
which is a
That's
pretty
very
empowering
cool.
place to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a
So
conversation that I had with Joe Tenenbaum runs PHP New York. And we talked about this a little bit. He was much more hesitant than I was, but I thought like Open Collective feels like an interesting tool here, just like have an open collective that's for the network, find some ways. Yeah, even if it's just, individuals and
I was just
agencies
gonna say
and yeah, people who just want
that's
to
the other
donate.
beautiful thing about it is that people that are attending and are in a position like not everyone is in a position to, but just like in business, the concept of customer surplus exists in all these ecosystems too. There's people who would happily chip in
Yep.
one time or recurring because they can
Yep.
and don't expect anything in return. And I feel like either approach can work. A blend of them is probably better long term.
Yep. Yep,
And
for
I,
sure.
Open Collective. I think among the things that I like about Open Collective, besides the fiscal hosting, is that it does provide that like essentially zero lift transparency. So people know the money that's coming in, they know where it's going out. And if they
Yep.
ever have a moment of hesitation, it's all on the record without
Yeah.
having to be on the blockchain.
There is another way to solve that problem, it turns out.
Yeah, a worse way. Um, but yeah, so I feel like there's. I will say this. I I feel like there is more room on the table for experimenting with sponsorships than most meetups do. In
Yeah.
the same way, to bring this all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, there's more room to experiment with the event formats. And I feel like that the corollary here is like there's a handful of tried and true tropes. It's not that they're bad, but the lack of evolution is probably not to anybody's advantage. And
Yeah.
so, like one of the beautiful things about doing things in community, this is maybe the last trick I'll leave you with for the day, is I know you've heard me say this many times over the history of Indie Hall, is like this is an experiment. We're just trying something.
Yeah.
So like to go into something like that and frame it as a prototype or as a pilot or an experiment disarms the we're changing things, and it's more of like that's working. Just because it's working doesn't mean we can't try something better, right? Let's see. Do we like it more? Do we like it less? Do we like it the same? And involve people in that process
Yeah.
to tie the conversation in a neat little bow.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. We've been going for a little while now, so we probably should finish up. Is there anything else before we stop that like, coming in you were like, "Oh, this is on my mind," or like, is there any direction that we haven't gone that you want to go before we stop?
I mean, the only thing I'll say, and I think this is like a testament to why what you're doing has worked, is like post quarantine meetup culture, I think is more important than ever before.
Yeah,
I think
for
about the
sure.
positive impact of meetups on the first 15 years of my career, and like even just like how Philly changed from when you and I met on Panama a million years ago. And I look at Philly and I go, I understand why stuff went away, but
Yeah.
things aren't coming back quite in the way I would expect them to at
Yep.
this point,
Yep.
especially because every day, every week, I'm talking to people who are seeking it, right?
Yep. Yeah. 100%.
And I feel like it doesn't need it doesn't need to be new and novel to be worth doing and trying. And I'd say even if there is I'd say first look in your city and see if something is going on, right? And
Yes.
go participate. Like be a member before you're a leader, hands down. But also, if you're going to stuff and feeling like it's not your vibe, you've got two paths forward. One is to talk to other members and even those community leaders and say like, hey, or like, are you open to ideas? Or what if we did something like this? And and just however they receive it, take it at face value. If they're warm, welcoming, and they want to empower you, awesome. See where it goes. If they don't, I generally don't think it's worth trying to convince people.
Yeah.
It's an upward fight. But I recently ran into a woman. Actually, I saw her video on TikTok, of all places, and she was describing her experience of going to creative industry meetups in Philly as one. She's like, I'm a black woman. There's nobody like me in this room. It's kind of broy. The vibe is
Mm.
off. And I'm hearing her describe this, and I go, I'm not a black woman. That's the same experience I had in the mid 2000s going to business meetups. I was like, It's a bunch of old white dudes. This is not my scene. Where are my people? And if you are going to things, if you aren't going to things and you're trying to start a thing, go to things first. If you are
Yes.
going to things and not finding your vibe, A, try if there's anything else. And if not, try to make the thing that already exists better. And if that doesn't work, then I think it is 100% acceptable to say what that woman said out loud, which is, I went to stuff. It didn't work for me, and here's why. If you've tried to and it didn't work for you, come hang out with me. And it
Yeah.
doesn't need to be more complicated than that. She filled up Triple Bottom Brewing with like 80 people on a Thursday afternoon or something like that. And I walked in and I was like, this is awesome. What was the inspiration? And she basically told me my story from almost 20 years ago. And I was like, I'm so excited for you. I don't know what this is going to turn into, but I'm going to keep coming to these because I want to see it. I want to see what it turns into. And if there's any way that I could, I didn't even bring up Indy Hall. Did not give her any of my backstory, which that's not what she was there for. But that's somebody that I was like, all right, I'm going to keep showing up because if there ever becomes a time where I can help her in some way, I would like her to see that I care and have earned her trust to do so. And I feel like that's practicing what we preach at all levels of community. And I'm going to show up for somebody else's thing because I think it's good for Philadelphia to have
Yeah.
multiple versions of things that seem the same, but each have their own energy, their own DNA, their own leadership, their own regulars. You know, you live in most of the cities on this list I'm seeing are big enough. I don't see a city on this list that is so big that it couldn't support more than one.
Sure.
And I think that that is a good thing for people to
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think
It's not
that
zero
I
sum.
think yeah, I think that that's absolutely right. Like there's plenty of room for all sorts of different ways to approach things. And I think also kind of what you said at the beginning of this, I mean, you effectively described the beginning of the PHP Philly meetup, which is like I, like you, spent a lot of time at tech meetups in the early 2000s. It was a big part of yeah, like what how I got to connect with other people early in my career. And post pandemic, I was just like, I need to have that. And I was very frustrated that, there's really almost all of the original meetups of like our era are gone, you know? And I just couldn't find much. And I thought, okay, I guess like if I want it to happen, I'm going to give it a shot myself. But there are clearly lots of other people out there that are having the same feelings.
That's right.
And so if anyone has made it an hour and 39 minutes in and is like thinking about joining up and starting their own meetup somewhere, I would say go for it because it really is. I mean, it's not necessarily easy. It might not work out, but it's worth a shot,
I will say that the positive impact on my life and the lives of basically everybody that I know that has tried this, even if it doesn't work out, has been positive. The byproducts of putting this kind of effort out into the world, only positives come from it as far as I'm concerned.
100%. I mean, like here's the case in point for me is last night I had a handful of people in my basement playing poker, all of whom I met through PHP Philly, right?
Totally.
The
Got nothing to do with PHP.
It has nothing to do with PHP, but just like a couple of people were talking about poker. A couple other people were like, "Oh, I'm interested in poker." I was like, "I've always wanted to learn. I'm not good, but like if we could do a game where you guys who know what you're talking about teach us, I'm in." And like, yeah, there's like another social benefit for me, that
So
has nothing to do with any of it.
I want to tie that back to that point I said before about like most community building is not about creating things or making things happen. It's about letting them happen. That's a perfect example. If you had tried to start a poker night, I bet it would have been a lot of talking about how great it would be to start a poker night. Nothing would have happened. But noticing
Sure.
other people in the community saying, "Hey, it would be cool if we did this," and you could say like, "Yeah, yeah, that would be cool. How would we do it? Let's make it happen."
Well, and to
When it
further
comes
your
from
point,
them,
to further your point even more, it wasn't even me; it was someone else who started an offshoot Discord that was like, hey, I know a bunch of people were talking about poker. If you want to, come on over and let's like organize something, right?
100%. a hundred
Yeah.
percent. So that is the most reliable playbook, is look for a thing that seems like it would happen, and see if there's a barrier that you have the ability to remove. Or if something happens the first time and you're not sure why, take a step back and say, what allowed that to happen, and how could I increase the odds of that happening again? Those are those are more valuable moves than, you know, being a social media guru or any of the other
Right.
things that, doing stuff for the gram or whatever. Like, this is that's the power move. And the fact that you did it is, and again, I've known you for close to 20 years now, so I'm not surprised. But like, for me, that's the proof that you didn't just get lucky. It's that you've got very good instincts.
A
Whether
little bit of both.
you recognize it or not, it's all both, right? It's not exclusively luck. I don't think you get to the same place. So it's awesome. It's exciting. I'm glad you're doing it, and I'm glad we had a chance to catch up.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anything that you wanna plug or send folks off to? How do people find you? All that stuff.
My relationship with social media is definitely weird right now. I'm on Blue Sky probably the most, and not nearly as much as I was ever on Twitter, but at alexhillman.com, I think is what I tied it to my personal domain there on Blue Sky. And then, across the web, if you're in Philadelphia, you come through Philadelphia, please look us up. Come through Indie Hall. We'd love to have you by, whether it's for a day or otherwise. IndieHall.org for all that jazz, or I'd say Indie Hall's most active platform right now is Instagram, if you're there. And then Stacking the Bricks, the work that I do on the sort of creative entrepreneurship side of things, stackingthebricks.com, and my book at tinymba.com. Be it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Alex. This has been really fun.
Catch you later.
Until next time.